The courtroom was bustling with the usual noise of people waiting for their cases to be heard. The air was thick with tension, the kind that always seemed to hang over courtrooms. Lawyers were discussing their cases quietly. The judge sat at the bench, flipping through some papers, preparing for the day ahead. It was a normal, routine day, until something happened that would change everything. In the back of the courtroom, a small, quiet figure stood beside his foster mother. A young black boy, no older than 5, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes were wide, scanning the room, taking in the faces, the unfamiliar setting. His foster mother held his hand tightly, trying to reassure him. But it was clear that the boy was nervous. It was his first time in a courtroom, and the seriousness of the place made him feel small. The judge, an elderly woman with a kind face, stood from behind her desk and called the case. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone's eyes turned to the front. But just as the judge began to speak, something unexpected happened. The boy, still holding his foster mother's hand, suddenly froze. His little face turned pale, and his eyes locked onto the judge. He let go of his foster mother's hand and slowly walked forward, his feet barely making the sound of a cold tile floor. The room watched in confusion as the boy stood there, staring at the judge. His eyes seemed to recognize her, like he had seen her before. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the boy said the words that would change everything. "Mom." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. It was as if time had stopped. No one knew what to say. The judge, her hand resting on her papers, went completely still. She blinked a few times, as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. The boy's words echoed in the room, bouncing off the walls and landing in every person's mind. "Mom." The boy had whispered it so innocently, but those who heard it knew something had happened that no one could explain. The judge's face went pale, and she quickly stood up from her seat, her mind racing. Was she hearing things? No, she had definitely heard the boy say "Mom." But that couldn't be possible. She had never seen him before. She had no children. At least, that was what she thought. Her eyes met the boy's, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to disappear. She could feel her heart racing in her chest. It was as if a memory from her past had suddenly come to life, a memory she had buried deep within her. Her hands shook as she tried to steady herself. The boy's foster mother rushed to his side, pulling him gently away from the judge. She whispered something to him, but he was too caught up in his own thoughts. He didn't understand what had just happened. To him, it was simple, a boy in a courtroom, looking at someone who seemed familiar. But the judge knew it wasn't that simple. A murmur spread through the room. The audience could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was talking, wondering who this boy was, why he had said those words, and why the judge was acting so strangely. The judge cleared her throat and tried to regain her composure, but her thoughts were racing. She had never had a child. She had never been married. So why was this boy looking at her like he knew her? Why did he call her Mom? Her mind raced back to her past, to a time long ago when things were different, before she became the judge everyone respected. But that was another life, a life she had left behind. Trying to shake the thoughts from her head, she called the courtroom to order. "We will proceed with the case," she said, her voice steady, but her mind far away. She quickly looked down at the case papers, but the boy's face kept appearing in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that this child somehow had something to do with her past. The courtroom was still buzzing with whispers after the boy's mysterious words had echoed through the room. Every eye was on the judge as she tried to maintain her composure. The proceedings had resumed, but it felt like the air had thickened, pressing down on everyone. No one could forget what had just happened. The boy's simple, innocent question, "Mom," had thrown everything into chaos. Everyone wondered the same thing. Who was this child, and what did he know? The judge, however, couldn't concentrate on the case. She kept glancing toward the boy, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. How could this be happening? Why did this boy call her Mom? Could he really be hers? But that was impossible. She had never had a child. She had dedicated her life to her career, and there had been no room for anything or anyone else. Her past was locked away, carefully hidden from the world. Yet, somehow, this little boy was dragging it all back into the light. She felt her heartbeat quicken as memories from a time long ago flooded her mind. She had once been a different person, a young woman with dreams, love, and a future full of possibilities. But everything had changed. Her career had taken center stage, and her past was buried, locked away where no one could find it. And yet, here was this boy, standing in front of her, calling her Mom. Her thoughts were interrupted as she caught the boy's eyes once again. He stood quietly next to his foster mother, a perplexed expression on his face. The woman had taken him away from the judge as soon as the boy had spoken, clearly trying to calm him down. But the boy's gaze never left the judge. He didn't seem scared. Instead, there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he knew exactly who she was, even though she had never seen him before. The judge felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a random case. There was something about this boy, something connected to her, something deep in her past. She needed answers, but the fear of what she might find held her back. Could she really face the truth? As the trial continued, the judge's mind wandered. She had never been a sentimental person. Emotions had no place in the courtroom. But this was different. She found herself fighting to stay focused on the case at hand, but it was no use. The boy's words kept ringing in her ears. Mom. Her gaze moved to the boy's foster mother. The woman had tried to console him, but the child was fixated on the judge, his eyes following her every move. There was something oddly familiar about the boy's expression. It was as if he had known her all his life. She had to know more. Who was he? The case dragged on, but the judge couldn't concentrate. She had to finish her duties, of course, but the questions burning in her mind were much more pressing. What did this boy know? Why had he called her Mom? And who was he really? The trial finally adjourned for lunch, and the judge took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She needed answers. She couldn't just let this go. This was bigger than anything she had ever encountered before. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this boy was connected to her in a way she couldn't yet understand. She stood up from her bench and walked to the back of the courtroom, where the boy and his foster mother were still sitting. The boy had stopped looking at her, but she could see the curiosity in his eyes. He seemed almost expectant, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for her to react, perhaps. She swallowed hard, fighting back the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The foster mother looked up as the judge approached, her expression wary but respectful. The woman didn't know what to make of the situation, but she knew that this was no ordinary encounter. She stepped aside, allowing the judge to kneel down to the boy's level. "Hey there," the judge said softly, her voice gentle. "What's your name?" The boy blinked up at her, a small frown on his face. "James," he said quietly, his voice soft but clear. I think you're my mom." The words hit the judge like a ton of bricks. The boy's innocent face was full of sincerity. There was no malice, no trickery, just a child, lost and confused, searching for something he could only hope for. Her heart clenched. What was happening? How could this be? The boy's foster mother stepped forward, her eyes full of concern. "Judge, I'm sorry, but I think he's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. We're just here for a case." The judge stood up, her heart racing. She didn't want to let her emotions get the best of her, but everything inside her was screaming to understand, to know the truth. Could this boy really be hers? Was it possible? She had to find out. "I need to know where he's from," the judge said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Where did he come from?" The foster mother hesitated, unsure of how much she should say. "He's from an adoption agency. He's been with us for a few years now. We've never met anyone who looked like him. But he's always been drawn to you, ever since he saw you in the courtroom." The words stung. Could this be true? Had the boy seen something in her, something that connected them? Was this child really hers, or was there something else at play? The judge took a deep breath and stood back, her thoughts racing. She knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't ignore the signs any longer. She needed to find out who this boy really was, even if it meant digging up secrets she had long buried. But something told her that the truth would come at a cost, and the cost might be higher than she was prepared to pay. As the lunch break ended and the courtroom filled once again, the judge couldn't shake the feeling that the mystery of the boy was just beginning. She had to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. This wasn't just a case. This was something personal, something life-changing. And it was only just beginning. The afternoon session began, but the judge couldn't focus. Her mind was still back in that moment with the boy, his simple question echoing in her thoughts. Mom. She had tried to push it aside, but it kept resurfacing, demanding her attention. It was as though everything she had worked for, everything she had built in her life, was now being threatened by a single word. As the trial resumed, the room seemed distant to her. She could hear the words of the attorneys and the witness, but they felt muffled, almost unreal. Her eyes kept drifting to the little boy sitting at the back of the courtroom with his foster mother, quietly watching her. Every time she glanced at him, she saw the same thing in his eyes: hope. He believed, somehow, that she was his mother. And even more troubling, there was something familiar about that belief. The judge tried to block out the thoughts, telling herself that it couldn't be true. She didn't have children. She had always been too focused on her career, too dedicated to her job. There had been no room for a family. No room for the kind of life that involved raising a child. But the boy's eyes, they told a different story. And now, every time she looked at him, she felt a strange tug at her heart. She had to find out who he really was. Her mind wandered back to her younger years, before she had become the stern, no-nonsense judge everyone knew. Before her career had consumed every moment of her life, there had been a time when she had dreamed of having a family. There had been a man, someone she had loved deeply. But that had been years ago. A different time, a different life. The man was long gone, and so were those dreams. She had buried everything about her past when she chose this life. But this boy was a reminder of a past she had tried so hard to forget. She tried to shake off the unease, but it lingered. The trial was over for the day, and the judge had been left alone in her chambers. Her mind raced as she sat at her desk, running through every detail of the encounter. She had to get answers. But how? The boy's foster mother had said that he came from an adoption agency, but how could that explain the bond between the child and herself? She needed more information, and she wasn't sure where to turn. Without thinking, she found herself dialing a number on her phone. One she had not called in years. The number belonged to an old friend, someone who had known her before she had become the cold, professional judge the world saw today. Someone who had shared her past. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Hello. It was her friend, her voice low, almost hesitant. It's me, the judge said, her own voice sounding foreign to her. I need your help. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then her friend responded, What's going on? Is everything all right? I don't know, the judge replied, the words spilling out before she could stop them. There's a child in my courtroom today. A little boy. And I think he might be mine. Her friend was silent for a moment, clearly taken aback. What are you talking about? That's impossible. I thought so too, the judge said, her voice shaking slightly. But he called me Mom. And there's something about him, something familiar. I need to know who he is. I need to know if this is real. Her friend let out a sigh. You know I've always been here for you, but you're asking me to dig into a past that's been long buried. Are you sure you want to do this? What if it opens old wounds? The judge hesitated. She had spent so many years running from her past, and now it was catching up to her. But she couldn't ignore the boy's words. She couldn't ignore the possibility that he was part of her past, and if she didn't act now, She might never get the answer she needed. "I have to know," she said firmly. "Please, I need you to help me find out who this boy really is." Her friend sighed again. "All right, I'll help you. But be prepared. If this boy is really connected to your past, you might not like what you find." "I don't care," the judge replied, determination in her voice. "I need to know the truth." The conversation ended quickly, and the judge sat back in her chair, her heart pounding. What had she just agreed to? She had no idea where this journey would take her, but one thing was certain. She couldn't keep pretending her past didn't matter. The boy's presence in her courtroom was a sign that her past was coming to find her, and it wasn't going to let her hide anymore. Later that evening, after the courthouse had emptied out, the judge returned home. The stillness of her apartment felt different tonight. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen, something that would change everything she had ever known. As she sat on the couch, her mind returned to the boy's face, the way he had looked at her, the hope in his eyes. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her friend. "I found something." The message read, "Meet me tomorrow. We need to talk." The judge's heart raced. Tomorrow. Was this it? Was this where she would finally find the answers she had been searching for? She didn't know, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to change. And she was ready. The next morning, the judge arrived at the small cafe where she had agreed to meet her old friend. The place was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered around, sipping their coffee or reading the newspaper. The judge walked in, her eyes scanning the room, before she spotted her friend sitting at a corner table. She hadn't seen him in years, but the familiar face brought back a flood of memories. He waved her over, a serious look in his eyes. The judge sat down without saying a word. Her mind was racing. What had he found? What was the truth? Her friend didn't waste any time. He slid a small envelope across the table toward her. "I managed to get the information you asked for. But brace yourself. It's complicated." The judge took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside were a few papers, some photographs, and a birth certificate. Her heart pounded as she looked at the name on the birth certificate. A name she hadn't heard in years. The boy's name was Elijah Turner. Elijah Turner. The judge's voice was barely a whisper. She could feel the weight of the name pressing down on her. It meant something, but she couldn't quite place it. Her friend nodded gravely. "That's the name of the boy you saw in your courtroom yesterday. He's been in foster care for a while, but there's something you need to know. He's not just any child." The judge stared at the papers in front of her, her thoughts racing. "What do you mean? What's so special about him?" Her friend took a deep breath before continuing. "Elijah Turner is your son." The words hit the judge like a punch to the stomach. She couldn't breathe for a moment. Her mind went blank, the shock of the revelation overwhelming her. She looked at her friend, as if hoping he would take it back, that this was some kind of mistake. "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's impossible. I don't have a child." Her friend held up a hand, silencing her. "I know this is hard to believe, but I've done the research. This is your son, born years ago. And before you say anything, listen to me. Elijah was placed for adoption when you were forced to give him up." The judge felt the room spin around her. She felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. How could this be true? She had never even known she was pregnant. She had no memory of giving birth. And yet here was the evidence, staring her in the face. Elijah Turner was her child, a child she had never known she had. Why didn't I know? The words escaped her before she could stop them. Why didn't anyone tell me? Her friend's face softened with pity. You were young, and you had no choice. After everything that happened with your family, they made sure you never found out. They didn't want you to. You were sent away for a while to finish your studies, and the whole thing was covered up. They took him from you, placed him in foster care, and told you nothing. The judge's hands were shaking as she looked at the papers in front of her. How could they have done this to her? How could her own family have hidden the truth from her? kept her from her child. Her mind was a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. She had been robbed of so much, and now she was faced with a reality she had never expected. "There's more," her friend continued, pulling her from her thoughts. "Elijah's foster mother says he's been asking about you for months. He says he remembers you. He even told her that you're his mom. And the way he looked at you yesterday, it wasn't just coincidence." The judge's heart skipped a beat. She remembered the way Elijah had looked at her in the courtroom, the hope in his eyes, the quiet desperation. Could it really be true? Was he really her son? And if so, how could she have been so blind to it all? "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this." Her friend gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't have to fix it, but you do need to meet him. You need to be there for him. This is your chance to make things right." The judge sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. She had spent so many years building a career, focusing on her role as a judge, but now everything had changed. Her past, the life she had tried so hard to forget, was suddenly thrust into her present. And now, there was Elijah, a son she had never known she had. A son who needed her. "I don't even know how to begin," the judge said softly. "How do I make up for all the lost years?" Her friend reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "You don't have to make up for anything. You just have to start. You take it one step at a time. The rest will follow." The judge nodded slowly, taking in his words. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know how this would play out, but one thing was clear. She couldn't run from her past anymore. She couldn't pretend Elijah wasn't her son, and she had to face whatever came next. She stood up, determination settling over her. "I'm going to find him. I'm going to make things right, no matter what it takes." Her friend smiled. "I knew you'd make the right choice." With that, the judge left the cafe, her mind focused on the task ahead. There was no going back. The truth had been revealed, and now it was time to face it. The next step was uncertain, but she was ready. For the first time in years, she was ready to face her past and to embrace the future that awaited her and Elijah. "You said." The judge's mind raced as she walked down the courthouse steps. She had just finished a long day of hearings, but today, nothing felt the same. Today, she wasn't just the judge. She wasn't just a woman with a career or a life she had carefully built. Today, she was a mother, one who had just learned the truth about a child she never knew she had. Her car felt different as she drove, the familiar hum of the engine almost drowned out by the thoughts swirling in her head. The papers her friend had given her sat beside her on the passenger seat, the birth certificate still in her hands. Elijah Turner, her son. The name echoed in her mind like a haunting melody, but there was still so much she didn't understand. How had this happened? Why had she never known? What was she supposed to do now? The directions to the foster home were simple, and before she knew it, she had arrived. She parked her car in front of the small, modest building. It looked like any other house on the block, but she knew inside, everything was about to change. Elijah was inside, waiting for her, though neither of them had any idea what to expect from this meeting. Her heart raced in her chest as she walked up the steps to the front door. She took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. The moment felt surreal. Was she really doing this? Was she truly about to meet her son for the first time in years? The door opened, and the foster mother stood there, smiling kindly, but with a hint of concern in her eyes. "You must be the judge," she said softly. "Elijah is inside. He's been asking about you ever since yesterday." The judge smiled nervously, her voice trembling as she replied, "Yes, I'm here to meet him." The foster mother stepped aside to let her in, and the judge followed her through the house. Everything felt foreign, and yet strangely familiar, like a dream that she couldn't wake up from. The living room was quiet, but she could hear the sound of soft footsteps coming from another room. Elijah, her son. Then there he was. He walked into the room, and their eyes met for the first time. The moment felt like it stretched out forever. The judge felt as though she had been holding her breath for years, and now she could finally exhale. The boy standing before her. This was the child she had been searching for, the child she had never known she had. His dark eyes looked at her with a mixture of hope, confusion, and a deep, unspoken longing. And just like that, everything clicked into place. Elijah. The judge's voice broke the silence, and the boy nodded. The room seemed to hold its breath. Time seemed to slow as the judge took a step forward, unsure of what to say. Elijah took a tentative step toward her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to make sense of the connection between them. He spoke quietly, almost too softly for her to hear, but the words hit her like a wave. "Are you my mom?" The judge froze. The question was simple, but it cut through her. She had never been prepared for this moment, never expected to hear those words from her own child. She had so many questions, so many things she wanted to ask, but in that moment, all she could do was stare at him. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I didn't know about you. I didn't know you were out there." Elijah seemed to process her words, his face crunching up in confusion. "But you are my mom, right?" The judge's heart ached as she looked at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. He had been so sure, so confident, that she was the one who could give him the answers he had been searching for. And now, all she could do was stand there, overwhelmed by the truth that had been hidden from her for so long. Slowly, she walked toward him and knelt down so that she was eye level with him. "Yes, Elijah," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'm your mom." Tears welled up in the boy's eyes, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The years of separation, the pain of not knowing, all seemed to melt away in the quiet of that room. The judge reached out and gently touched his cheek, a simple gesture of love, one that spoke volumes more than any words could. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there for you all these years. I didn't know, but now I do. And I promise, I'll be here for you now." Elijah's eyes shone with a mix of emotion as he reached out and hugged her. It wasn't a hug of anger, but one of relief, of hope. It was the kind of hug that a child gives when they finally feel like they are safe, when they found the person they had always hoped existed. The judge held him tightly, her heart swelling with a mix of joy and regret. She had missed so much of his life, but she wasn't going to waste another moment. They had time now, and it was time to start over, to rebuild what had been lost. There was so much she still needed to understand, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let him go again. As they pulled apart, Elijah smiled at her through his tears. "Can we go get ice cream now?" he asked, his voice filled with hope and excitement. The judge couldn't help but laugh, the sound a mixture of joy and relief. "Yes, Elijah. Ice cream sounds perfect." And just like that, their new beginning had started. The sun was beginning to set as the judge and Elijah walked out of the foster home. The evening air had a calmness to it, and the streets were quiet, the world around them seeming to move slower than usual. For the first time in years, the judge felt a sense of peace settle over her. This wasn't just about finding Elijah. It was about finally getting the chance to make things right. "Do you like ice cream?" the judge asked, her voice soft but warm. It was a simple question, but it felt like a lifeline to something bigger. She had so many things to catch up on, but she had to start with the little things, simple moments like this. Elijah nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with excitement. "I love ice cream. I always wanted to go to an ice cream shop, but never got the chance." A lump formed in the judge's throat at his words. The simplicity of the request, something most kids took for granted, made her realize just how much she had missed. How much he had missed. She hadn't been there for those small moments, those small joys, and now she was determined to make them count. They drove to the nearest ice cream shop, a little local place known for its giant scoops and endless flavors. The lights outside flickered softly, casting a warm glow over the street. The judge parked the car, and they both stepped out, the cool air brushing their faces. Elijah looked up at her, a question in his eyes. "Do you think they'll have my favorite flavor?" he asked, his voice full of hope. The judge smiled down at him. "What's your favorite?" "Chocolate chip cookie dough," he said without hesitation. "It's the best." The judge chuckled softly, nodding. "I think they'll have it. Let's go find out." They walked into the shop, the bell above the door chiming as they entered. The small space was warm, filled with the rich scent of freshly made waffle cones. Elijah's eyes immediately lit up as he looked at the variety of flavors on display, each one more colorful and tempting than the last. It was a simple joy, but one that carried so much weight in that moment. The woman behind the counter greeted them with a smile. "What can I get for you today?" she asked, her tone friendly. Elijah's eyes didn't hesitate. "I'll have a scoop of chocolate chip cookie dough, please," he said, his voice filled with excitement. The judge smiled at him, the tenderness in her heart growing with each passing second. She hadn't known how much she needed this simple connection, this quiet moment of shared happiness. She turned to the woman at the counter and placed their order, making sure to get an extra scoop for herself. They paid, and with their cones in hand, they took a seat by the window, watching the world go by. Elijah took a bite of his ice cream and grinned. "This is so good. I've never had anything like it before," he said, his face lighting up with joy. The judge couldn't help but laugh, watching him enjoy something so simple, yet so special. She took a bite of her own ice cream, savoring the cold sweetness. It was nothing extraordinary, but it felt like the world had finally shifted into a place where things made sense, where she could take care of him, where she could be the mother he had needed. They sat there for a while, sharing stories and small laughs. Elijah told her about his life in the foster home, about the friends he had made, and the things he missed. The judge listened carefully, her heart aching as she heard the small details of his life that had passed her by. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. She was here now. She was going to make up for the lost time, piece by piece. "So," the judge said, leaning back in her chair, "what's your favorite thing to do?" Elijah paused, thinking for a moment. "I like reading," he said finally. "I don't get to do it much, but I really like it when I can." The judge's heart softened. "What kind of books do you like?" "Elves and magic," Elijah said with a grin. "I like imagining places that are different, where everything is better. It helps me forget, you know." The judge nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes, it's nice to escape to a different world where everything makes sense." They shared a quiet moment, the weight of Elijah's words hanging in the air. It was the first time he had opened up like that, and the judge felt a deep sense of gratitude that he felt safe enough to share his feelings with her. It wasn't easy, but it was a start, a new beginning. As they finished their ice cream, the judge took a deep breath. "Elijah," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you." Elijah looked at her, his eyes wide and full of emotion. "Really?" he asked quietly. "Really," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "I'm not going anywhere." The boy smiled, a small but genuine smile that made the judge's heart swell. She didn't know how long it would take to rebuild everything, but she knew one thing for certain. They had each other now, and that was enough. As they left the ice cream shop and got back into the car, the judge glanced at Elijah. The boy was no longer just a stranger she had discovered. He was her son, the child she was going to protect, love, and care for. He was her family now, and nothing would change that. They drove home together, the streets bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, the judge felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, and she wasn't going to let go of this newfound bond. Not now. Not ever. "You said." As they finished their ice cream, the judge took a deep breath. "Elijah," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here for you. I'll always be here for you." Elijah looked at her, his eyes wide and full of emotion. "Really?" he asked quietly. "Really," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "I'm not going anywhere." The boy smiled, a small but genuine smile that made the judge's heart swell. She didn't know how long it would take to rebuild everything, but she knew one thing for certain. They had each other now, and that was enough. As they left the ice cream shop and got back into the car, the judge glanced at Elijah. The boy was no longer just a stranger she had discovered. He was her son, the child she was going to protect, love, and care for. He was her family now, and nothing would change that. They drove home together, the streets bathed in the soft glow of the streetlights. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, the judge felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. And she wasn't going to let go of this newfound bond. Not now. Not ever. "You said." The next few weeks were a blur of new beginnings. The judge's life had changed in ways she never expected, and Elijah's life had been filled with moments of hope that he hadn't dared to imagine. Every day there were small steps forward, and every small victory felt like a monumental one. From the moment they left the ice cream shop, it was clear that this wasn't just a temporary fix. Something deep had shifted between them, a bond that would last a lifetime. One afternoon, the judge stood at the edge of the playground, watching as Elijah and some other children played together. The sun was warm, the sound of laughter filling the air. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly at peace. Elijah had made friends, real friends, and he was starting to trust again. That was something she could never take for granted. A few weeks ago, she never would have imagined herself standing here, watching her son play. She never imagined she'd be a mother. But now, it felt as natural as breathing. The uncertainty, the doubts, they had all faded away. There was no looking back. "You're doing a great job," a voice said from behind her. The judge turned to find her old colleague, a fellow attorney who had seen her through many difficult cases in the past. She had always admired his wisdom and strength. Today, his smile was warm, but there was an edge of concern in his eyes. "Thanks," the judge replied, her voice filled with quiet pride. "It's been a learning curve, to say the least." Her colleague stepped closer, his gaze shifting to the young boy on the playground. "I know this must be a lot for you. It's a big responsibility." The judge nodded, looking back at Elijah, who was now swinging on the swings, his laughter echoing through the air. "I never realized how much I needed this, how much he needed this," she said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and gratitude. "But now that I've found him, there's no turning back. I can't imagine my life without him." Her colleague smiled. "You're doing well. I know it's not easy, but I have no doubt you'll make it work. You're a good person, and that's what matters." The judge smiled, a small but genuine smile, as she watched Elijah's joyful face. She had heard those words many times in her life, but they had never meant as much as they did now. She was no longer the judge in the courtroom. She was his mother, and that was more important than anything else. The following weekend, the judge and Elijah visited the local library, one of the few places Elijah had always wanted to go, but had never had the chance. The moment they stepped inside, Elijah's eyes lit up. Shelves upon shelves of books surrounded them, and the smell of paper and ink filled the air. "Wow," Elijah whispered, his eyes wide. "There's so much here." The judge smiled, watching him run his fingers along the spines of the books. "I'm glad you're excited. You know, I used to love reading when I was your age." Elijah's face broke into a grin. "Can we get some books?" "Of course," the judge said, taking a seat at one of the reading tables. "Pick out whatever you like. It's all yours." Elijah hesitated for a moment, scanning the shelves. Then, with newfound confidence, he picked out a book about adventure and magic. He had always loved stories of fantastical worlds, and this one seemed to call to him. The judge could see the excitement in his eyes as he held the book close. As they walked to the checkout counter, Elijah turned to the judge. "I'm going to read this all by myself." The judge smiled down at him. "I'm proud of you, Elijah. You're growing so much every day." The librarian handed them the books, and as they left, Elijah's excitement was palpable. He clutched the book to his chest like it was a treasure, and the judge couldn't help but feel a sense of pride swell in her heart. She had never been the type to boast about her accomplishments, but in that moment, she couldn't deny that this feeling, was everything. Over the next few months, their lives continued to change. Elijah thrived in his new school, his grades improving as he gained confidence in his abilities. The judge, too, had found a new sense of purpose. Her colleagues noticed the change in her as well. She seemed more at ease, more content. It was as though the weight of her past had lifted, and in its place, there was a new chapter unfolding. But it wasn't always easy. There were moments when Elijah's past would resurface, when he would wake up in the middle of the night, crying out in his sleep. There were times when the judge didn't know what to do, when she felt lost and unsure. But she always found a way to help him, to calm him down, to reassure him that he was safe. She wasn't perfect, but she was learning every day. And that was enough. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Elijah looked up at the judge, his small hand clutching the edge of his book. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity, "do you think we'll always be okay?" The judge paused, looking at him with deep affection. She didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, she realized something important. "We'll always be okay, Elijah," she said softly. "As long as we have each other, we'll be okay." Elijah smiled, his eyes full of trust. "I'm glad you're my mom." The judge's heart swelled with love as she reached out to hug him. "I'm glad you're my son," she whispered. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They had built something unbreakable, a bond that would last forever. It wasn't always easy, but with each other, they could handle anything. This was only the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, the judge felt that her life had found its true purpose. The sun was setting as the judge and Elijah sat together on the porch of their modest home. The air was cool and crisp, a soft breeze rustling the leaves of the trees surrounding them. Elijah, now a little older and more confident, had grown used to the quiet peace of his new life. The judge, too, had found solace in the calm after years of turmoil. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The future didn't feel so uncertain anymore. Elijah rested his head against the judge's shoulder, his small hand wrapped around hers as they watched the world go by. It was a moment of stillness, a moment where the weight of everything that had happened seemed to fade away, if only for a few minutes. For so long, their lives had been filled with noise, courtrooms, fights, struggles, and pain. But now, there was quiet, and it felt good. "Mom," Elijah said, breaking the silence, his voice soft but full of emotion, "I think I finally get it." The judge glanced down at him, raising an eyebrow. "Get what?" Elijah shifted slightly, his eyes focused on the distant horizon. "I used to think that maybe things would always be hard, that I wouldn't be able to fit in, or that I'd always be alone. But now I know that I'm not alone. You're here, and I have a family. I don't need to be afraid anymore." The judge felt a lump rise in her throat, and she blinked back tears. She wasn't used to such raw honesty, but hearing Elijah speak so openly about his feelings made her heart swell with pride and gratitude. He had come so far, and so had she. "I'm proud of you, Elijah," the judge said quietly, squeezing his hand. "You've taught me so much about strength, resilience, and love. You're stronger than you know." Elijah smiled up at her, his expression pure and innocent. "I think I learned it from you." A soft chuckle escaped the judge's lips. "I'm just doing the best I can, and I'm so glad we have each other." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of the world lifting from their shoulders. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the vastness. Elijah tilted his head back to gaze at them, his eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think we're safe now?" Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The judge smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I think we've always been safe," she said softly. "As long as we have each other, we'll always be safe." It was a simple statement, but it carried more weight than any legal judgment she'd ever made in her career. It was the kind of truth that couldn't be disputed. In this moment, they were safe, together. And for the first time in a long time, the judge realized that her own heart was at peace. As the evening deepened, they stayed on the porch for a little longer, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filling the air. The past no longer held them captive. The future no longer scared them. The judge had found a new role in life, not just as a judge in the courtroom, but as a mother, someone who could protect and love with everything she had. And as Elijah yawned and leaned into her side, the judge made a silent promise to herself. She would never let go of this feeling, this peace. She would never let go of the love she had for this boy, and she would do everything in her power to make sure he always knew he was loved, protected, and never alone. "Good night, Elijah," she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Good night, Mom," he murmured, his voice full of trust and warmth. As the night enveloped them, the judge held her son close, her heart swelling with love. There would always be challenges ahead. Life was never simple. But for now, in this moment, she had everything she needed. She had her son. She had her peace. And together, they would face whatever came next. The future might be unknown, but one thing was certain. They would face it together, with strength, love, and unshakable bond. The stars above them twinkled brightly in the dark sky, a reminder that, no matter what the world threw their way, they were not alone.